Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. Are you ready to dive deep today?
Always ready for a deep dive.
Me too.
Oh,
Okay, so today we're going deep into the world of American politics. And,
buckle up.
yeah, seriously,
Oh,
it's going to be a wild ride.
yeah.
We're using Alison Beckford's book as our guide.
Oh, yeah, the evolution of a lie.
That's the one. How the modern-day politics of America began. I mean, that title alone,
It grabs you.
totally. And this deep dive really lives up to the title. So many aha moments. We're going to trace how American politics got to where it is today. Like, how did we get here?
It's a fascinating journey, and Beckford does such a good job of, peeling back the layers.
Right. It's not just like dry facts and dates.
No way. She gets into the strategies, the personalities, the whole story of how politicians learn to connect with voters.
Especially using media, right? Like how that whole game changed over time.
Exactly. It's full of twists and turns, and honestly, some pretty shocking revelations. You're going to be like, whoa, I never knew that.
Seriously. Like, I was blown away by some of the stuff in this book. Okay, so let's start with Reagan. Beckford really paints a vivid picture of his rise to power.
Yeah, from Hollywood to the White House.
Right. Like, talk about a masterclass in charisma and using the media to your advantage.
It's fascinating how his early career shaped his political approach.
Yeah.
He understood the power of storytelling, how to connect with people on an emotional level.
And project optimism, even when things were tough.
Exactly. He honed those skills in Hollywood and then brought them to the political stage. It's like he was made for it.
It's crazy how much his background influenced his political style. And then there's Reaganomics.
Oh, yeah, that was a game changer.
Beckford really digs into the impact of that, both the good and the bad.
Right, because it wasn't just an economic policy, it represented a whole shift in political thinking.
Yeah.
That whole idea of trickle-down economics.
Like cutting taxes for the wealthy so they can create jobs and boost the economy.
Yeah, and it sparked so much debate. Some people argued it led to economic growth, others said it just widened the gap between the rich and poor.
And that debate is still going on today, right?
Oh, absolutely. It shows how much these ideas are woven into our political fabric even decades later.
It's like these echoes from the past still influencing us today. And speaking of the past, Beckford describes the 80s as this time of huge change and division,
It was like a cultural and political melting pot.
where a lot of the trends we see today started to bubble up,
Yeah, you had the rise of conservatism fueled by Reagan's popularity.
but also these vibrant countercultures emerging.
Think about the music and movies of that era. They were pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo, getting people talking.
Totally. And then on top of that, you had technology starting to take off.
The dawn of the digital age.
Personal computers, the internet. It's like Beckford's hinting at this massive wave that's about to hit.
And man, did it ever hit. Can you imagine politics today without the internet?
No way. It's mind-blowing to think how different things would be.
Campaigns, news cycles, political debates. It would be a whole different world.
Okay, so speaking of things that change the political landscape, let's talk about gerrymandering.
Mhm.
Beckford does an amazing job of explaining this.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't really understand.
I know I didn't before I read this book. It blew my mind how much power there is in just redrawing district lines on a map.
Right. It's like playing a game with the rules, but the stakes are super high.
Because it affects who gets elected and whose voices are heard. Right.
Exactly. By manipulating those boundaries, parties can basically choose their voters instead of the other way around.
And Beckford takes us back to the very beginning of this, like the origin of the term.
Elbridge Gerry in that crazy salamander-shaped district back in 1812.
I know. It's crazy to think how something that happened so long ago is still relevant today.
And it's still being debated. Courts are constantly wrestling with the legality of it. Activists are fighting for fair districting practices.
It's a reminder that the rules matter. Like how those lines are drawn can really impact the outcome of elections.
Big time. It's all connected,
Absolutely. Oh, and I have to share this fun fact that Beckford mentions. Did you know that the whole red state, blue state thing?
Yeah, like how we color code states on the electoral map.
Right.
Yeah.
It all started with a random decision by a TV network during an election.
I know. It's crazy how these arbitrary choices can become so ingrained in our political culture.
Like we didn't even think about it anymore. It's just how we see things.
And that's just one example. The language we use, how we frame debates, it's all part of a constructed narrative.
It's like Beckford's showing us how the game is played behind the scenes.
Exactly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Okay, so before we move on to the 90s, I want to remind everyone that if you're loving this deep dive,
Hit that like button.
yes, subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and be sure to check out Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
We've got a ton of great content over there.
Okay, so now let's step into the 90s, a decade that Beckford calls pivotal in the evolution of American politics. This is the era of Newt Gingrich.
And the Republican Revolution.
Right. Beckford really digs into Gingrich's contract with America.
That set of conservative policy proposals that really shook things up.
It galvanized the Republican Party and led to them taking control of Congress in 1994.
It was a huge shift in power.
And it led to some major political battles. Like Beckford describes the government showdown of the 90s.
Oh, man, that was intense.
Congress and President Clinton clashing.
Yeah.
It was high-stakes political chicken.
It really showed how divided American politics had become.
And it also highlights the growing influence of media, like how the 24-hour news cycle was amplifying the conflict.
And shaping public perception. It's like the media was becoming a player in the game itself.
Beckford makes a really interesting point about how cable news and talk radio were contributing to this polarization.
Yeah, they were creating these echo chambers where people were only hearing what they already believed.
Which made it harder to find common ground and have productive conversations.
Exactly. And that trend has only continued, right? Like with social media and everything.
It's like the media landscape was setting the stage for the even more fragmented and polarized environment we see today.
It's wild to think how much things have changed, even just in the past few decades.
It's amazing, right? From Reagan's charisma to the partisan battles of the 90s, it's clear that understanding the past is key to making sense of the present.
Totally. We've got to learn from history so we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Exactly. But we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover as we move into the 21st century.
Oh, yeah. Things are about to get even more interesting.
Buckle up.
So as we move into the 2000s, Beckford doesn't shy away from 9/11.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Huge. She really examines how it shaped the political landscape, like how it impacted George W. Bush's presidency and American foreign policy.
It's hard to overstate the impact of that day, right? Like on the national psyche and on
It
politics.
was a turning point.
Beckford reminds us that Bush's presidency was totally transformed by this event
Leading to the War on Terror,
and the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan.
decisions that had massive consequences, debates about national security, civil liberties, the role of America in the world.
It's like everything shifted after 9/11.
Definitely. And then on top of that, you have the economic roller coaster of the Bush era.
Oh, yeah, the economy was all over the place.
The dot-com bubble bursting, the housing crisis, and then the 2008 financial meltdown.
It was like one thing after another.
Beckford explores how all of this fueled anxieties about the economy and whether the government could handle it.
It's interesting how she connects those economic anxieties to the political climate.
Right, like that uncertainty and hardship created fertile ground for populism and questioning those established institutions.
People were looking for answers, looking for someone to blame.
And that theme becomes even more prominent as we move into the Obama era.
Obama, such a historic election.
The first black president.
Mhm.
Beckford captures that initial euphoria, the sense of hope and change he represented.
But she also digs into the fierce opposition he faced
Like the rise of the Tea Party movement.
and the role of conservative media in fueling that opposition.
Beckford's really good at showing how media shapes political narratives.
Oh, yeah. She talks about outlets like Fox News.
Catering to a specific audience, often presenting a very different view of events compared to more traditional news sources.
And that fragmentation of the media landscape just added to the polarization.
Totally. When people are getting their news from sources that already align with their beliefs, it's harder to have meaningful conversations across those divides.
It's like everyone's living in their own echo chamber.
And that makes it harder to find common ground and compromise.
Okay, so one thing that really struck me in Beckford's book is her analysis of Obamacare.
The Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, it's fascinating how she breaks down how healthcare became such a symbol of ideological division.
It became this proxy war for bigger arguments about the role of government, individual responsibility, the whole nature of American society.
It's like healthcare tapped into some really deep-seated beliefs and values.
And those passions were running high on both sides,
And then, of course, we come to the 2016 election.
which Beckford sees as a culmination of a lot of these trends she's been tracing.
The rise of Donald Trump, a figure unlike any other in modern American politics.
His victory shocked a lot of people.
But Beckford argues that it wasn't just this random event.
She lays out the groundwork showing how those economic anxieties, the polarization, the erosion of trust in institutions all created the perfect storm for his rise.
It's like all these forces were converging and then boom, Trump happens.
One of the most insightful parts of her analysis is how she looks at Trump's use of social media.
Especially Twitter.
He was a master of the tweet, those short, attention-grabbing messages.
Often outrageous, but also resonating with his base.
He understood how to use social media to shape the narrative, control the news cycle.
It was a strategy that proved incredibly effective.
And then you have his rallies.
Those massive gatherings that became like signature events.
Beckford argues that they weren't just political events, they were spectacles.
Carefully staged to create this sense of shared identity and loyalty among his supporters.
It was political theater at its finest.
And it worked. It energized his base and got people fired up.
And of course, we can't talk about the Trump era without talking about fake news.
That term became everywhere.
Beckford explores how misinformation online through social media created this climate of distrust.
It became harder and harder to know what was true and what was false.
It was a symptom of that larger erosion of trust in traditional sources of information.
It's like the foundation of truth was crumbling.
And that's a trend that's still with us today.
Okay, so before we dive deeper into the challenges of the digital age, I want to remind everyone.
If you're enjoying this deep dive,
hit that like button, subscribe, share this episode, and check out Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
we appreciate your support.
Okay, so now let's explore how Beckford connects the rise of social media to the evolving landscape of American politics.
She argues that social media has fundamentally reshaped the game.
It's not just about campaigns anymore.
It's about constant engagement, a 24/7 news cycle.
And anyone with a smartphone can be a political influencer.
It's like the old rules don't apply anymore.
Social media has democratized information in a way,
Giving a voice to people who might have been marginalized by traditional media.
but it's also created new challenges, right?
Definitely the same tools that can empower grassroots movements and amplify voices.
Can also be used to spread misinformation, sow division, manipulate public opinion.
It's a double-edged sword.
One thing I found fascinating was Beckford's discussion of meme magic,
Like how memes have become this potent form of political communication.
especially among younger generations.
It's this language that's often humorous and shareable.
And surprisingly effective at conveying complex ideas.
Memes are more than just silly pictures.
They can shape narratives and influence political discourse.
Beckford argues that we need to understand this new language of politics to navigate the digital world,
It's like we need to develop new forms of media literacy
to think critically about the information we see online.
and be more discerning consumers of political content.
It's not enough to just scroll through our feeds passively.
We need to engage actively, thoughtfully, with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Beckford's book is a call to action.
It's like she's saying, hey, don't just sit there and watch, get involved.
She's urging us to move beyond just observing the political landscape.
And become active participants in shaping it.
Our voices matter. Our actions have consequences.
The future of American democracy depends on an informed and engaged citizenry.
I love that message of empowerment.
Me too. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by politics, like our individual voices don't matter.
But Beckford reminds us that even small acts of engagement can make a difference.
It's not just about voting every 4 years.
It's about staying informed, engaging in civil discourse,
Holding our elected officials accountable.
finding ways to participate at all levels,
It's about reclaiming our role as active citizens.
not just passive consumers of political content.
It's about taking ownership of our democracy.
Recognizing that it's not a spectator sport.
It requires our constant attention and participation,
And Beckford gives us a roadmap for how to do that.
offering practical strategies for political engagement in the digital age.
Her insights are so relevant to the challenges we face today.
Misinformation, polarization, erosion of trust.
Her book helps us understand these challenges and find ways to address them.
And she reminds us that despite all of that, there's still reason for hope.
American democracy has been through tough times before.
And with an informed and engaged citizenry, we can overcome these obstacles.
It's a message that resonates especially now.
It reminds us that we're not powerless.
We have the power to shape the future, to create a more just and equitable society.
To make sure American democracy lives up to its ideals. So as we continue our deep dive,
Let's hold on to that sense of hope and empowerment.
let's remember we're not just passengers.
We're the navigators.
We can chart a course towards a brighter future. So as we wrap up this deep dive into American politics, I'm really struck by how much our choices matter. Like Beckford really emphasizes that individual citizens have power.
Oh, totally. She makes a strong case for informed and engaged citizenship. It's not just about complaining online or feeling overwhelmed by the news.
Right. It's about taking action, even if it seems small.
Exactly. She doesn't want us to feel hopeless. She's giving us a call to action.
A pep talk.
Yeah. She lays out these specific strategies for getting involved, and it starts with staying informed.
But it's not just reading headlines, right?
No way. It's about being media literate. Knowing how to spot fake news and finding different perspectives.
It's like thinking critically.
Yes. Don't just believe everything you see. Question your assumptions. Consider different viewpoints.
It's so easy to get caught up in the emotions of the news cycle,
Totally. But we got to pause, think things through.
Beckford's like, use your brain, people.
Yeah. And it's not just about absorbing information either.
Right. We got to talk to each other.
Right. Exactly. Engage in civil discourse, even with people we disagree with.
Ugh. That's a tough one.
I know it's hard, especially these days when everything feels so polarized.
But I think she makes a good point. Disagreement doesn't have to equal division.
We can find common ground, build bridges, remember that we're all part of this big, messy thing called American democracy.
Okay, I like that. Finding common ground instead of just fighting all the time.
And engagement goes beyond online discussions, too.
So like what? Get off our phones?
Well, yeah, sometimes. But also participate in local politics, go to town halls, contact your representative.
Hold their feet to the fire.
Exactly. Show up, make your voice heard, exercise your rights as citizens.
It's about being active participants in our communities and our nation right,
Mhm.
not just sitting on the sideline.
Totally. It's about pushing back against that cynicism and apathy, realizing that we can make a difference.
I feel like Beckford's really good at reminding us of that.
She is. And she doesn't just say, go do something. She gives practical advice on how to turn our passion into action.
So like what kind of stuff?
Volunteering for a campaign, donating to a cause you care about, speaking out about issues that matter to you.
So find your thing and do it.
Exactly. And remember, those individual actions, even the small ones, add up to something bigger.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah. You inspire other people, and it builds momentum, and eventually it can lead to real change.
That's what I love about her message. It's so hopeful.
Me too. She reminds us that we're not alone in this. There are so many people working to make things better.
Like a whole army of change makers.
Yeah. And she's inviting us to join that movement, to use our talents and our voices to make a difference.
So it's not just about politics. It's about creating a better future for everyone.
Exactly. It's about justice, equality, opportunity for all.
Man, I feel inspired now. Like, we can actually do this.
We can. Beckford doesn't sugarcoat the challenges, but she also highlights the resilience of the American spirit.
Like, we've been through tough times before. We've always come out stronger.
Exactly. We have this capacity for innovation and adaptation and this deep commitment to democracy.
It's like she's saying, don't give up. We got this.
Yeah. And remember, progress isn't always a straight line. There will be setbacks and disappointments.
But if we keep fighting, keep working together, we can make things better.
I think one of the most valuable things about Beckford's book is that it gives us this framework for understanding American politics.
Like a roadmap.
Yeah. She shows us how to see the big picture, understand the forces at play, the strategies and narratives that shape our reality.
So we can be more effective advocates for change.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, understanding the system, and finding ways to work within it.
Smart. So it's not just about shouting into the void. It's about being strategic.
Totally. And remembering that change takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
We got to be patient, persistent, willing to work with people, even if we don't agree on everything.
Find common ground, build coalitions, work towards a shared vision.
I'm feeling hopeful now, like we can actually create a better future.
Me too. Beckford's book is a powerful reminder that we have the power to shape our own destiny.
It all starts with making the choice to stay informed, to engage, to participate. And that's a choice we make every single day.
Powerful stuff. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
I've loved exploring these ideas with you.
Me too. And thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey through American politics.
We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we have.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends.
And be sure to join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube for more great conversations.
Thank you for listening to the Allison Knows podcast. Follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok. Until next time.